My name's Isobel Bull. I'm a senior associate at Hogan Lovells. I work in the debt capital markets practice in London. I studied law and French at the University of Nottingham and I graduated in 2016. I think both the solicitor route and the barrister route appealed to me at university, but ultimately I went down the solicitor route because doing a training contract really appealed. I really liked the idea of having a structured 2 years where I would get exposure to different practice areas. And I think that's one of the real benefits of doing a training contract. You will get a full 6 months, sometimes shorter depending on the number of rotations in the firm, but you'll get normally 6 months exposure to a practice area. You get to know the people within the team, you learn a lot, and there's no real substitute for actually imagining yourself in that team practicing in that industry. So the training contract really appealed also because of the opportunity to go abroad for 6 months, which I did, which was really fantastic. When I came to applying for training contracts, I looked at a few different firms. Hogan Lovells really appealed to me, I think largely because of the size of the firm. I had a real interest in doing international cross-border work, partly because I'd studied abroad at university. So that really appealed to me, the global footprint of the firm. And then I think it really came down to just enjoying being there when I went for an assessment day. Everyone I spoke to was incredibly friendly and engaging. Everyone was hugely generous with their time. I think it's quite a personal thing, but actually spending time in a firm and getting to speak to people at all different levels of seniority really gives you a feel for what it'd be like to work there. And Hogan Lovells just seemed a really good fit for me. When I started out at the beginning of my training contract, I was fairly sure I wanted to be a litigator, and I wasn't particularly interested in finance. And then as is quite common when you do a training contract, when I arrived in finance, actually the work really appealed to me. I found it challenging. Debt capital markets is quite a complex area, and that can feel a little bit daunting at the very beginning of your career, but actually it's also come to be one of the things that I really appreciate about debt capital markets. There's never a point at which you've seen everything and you know everything. There's always room to learn more and to work on new types of transactions. So I was surprised to find that finance really suited me because I had quite a clear idea of what direction my career was going to go in. But that is one of the really good things about a training contract, is it does sort of force you to look at other options, and there's no substitute for actually being there and experiencing the work for yourself. And I think one of the things that really appealed to me about finance more broadly was actually the pace of work. I liked the fact that the beginning of every week, my week ahead would look very different depending on the matters that I have in. Sometimes I work on things that have a day and a half and then they close because it's a really small amendment. Other times I work on a longer term project that might take up to 3 months. Because of the work that I do advising trustees and agents, not only on new transactions, but also on defaulted transactions and transactions which are being restructured all the way to the very contentious end of the spectrum, I also get exposure to litigation matters, and I'm working on a couple of those now. So I also get the variation of working alongside colleagues in our arbitration team and in our litigation team. So that variety I've always really appreciated, and it just keeps work life interesting. So a typical day in debt capital markets as an associate might involve working on a transaction which more often than not will involve other practice groups within the firm. It's quite unusual for me to work on a financing that exclusively involves my group. More often than not, we'll have input from the tax team, from the corporate team, from the restructuring team, but also from other offices abroad, because a lot of the transactions we work on are cross-border. So your day might involve advising on elements of English law within your specialism, but actually also coordinating advice that comes in from other teams within the firm and abroad. So that's a really fun aspect of the job. It's actually working alongside other specialists within the firm, and everyone is just so good at what they do. I'm always just so impressed by the level of expertise and in-depth knowledge that we have in every single aspect of law you could possibly think of. It doesn't matter how novel the problem is, how complex the question is, you will find someone within the firm who has exactly the knowledge that you need to answer the question. And they'll do so really, really quickly. They'll set out in a really, really clear way. So whatever problem our client finds themselves facing with, we will be able to find the answer. So that's always a really nice feeling. And actually you get to learn along the way as well about different practice areas and foreign law requirements as well, because so much of what we do is cross-border in nature. I specialise in acting for corporate trustees and agents. I'm based in debt capital markets, and a lot of the transactions I work on are DCM products. But I also advise trustees and agents on transactions which are being amended, which are being restructured, and are even being litigated right at the very contentious end of the spectrum. So that's really interesting because I get to work within DCM on what we call new money transactions, but I also work alongside our litigation colleagues and our arbitration colleagues. And I get to see the full life cycle of a transaction. And actually, experience of both really informs your view of the other. So because I've seen what can happen when details are overlooked, when things aren't thought about, and everyone falls out, which is not what anyone has in mind when a transaction is first put together, but because I have had exposure to that, it does really focus the mind on what is important to think about at the outset of a transaction. So I think it's made me a better transactional lawyer for having that contentious experience. And also it just keeps the weeks varied and interesting. The work that I do now as a senior associate is probably not actually that different from the work that I was doing as a trainee in terms of the matters that we work on, in terms of our clients. A lot of it is the same. The thing that changes is your degree of autonomy and the amount of control that you have over matters. So whereas as a trainee, I would expect to have a lot of supervision, a lot of support, people checking my work. Now as a senior associate, I will manage my own transactions and I'll be delegating to more junior people, certainly with input from partners and other senior members of the team as required. But it's actually just that confidence to run things by yourself, to advise the client yourself. I would say what I most enjoy about my career is the people that I work with. There's such a culture of mentorship within the firm, and people are incredibly generous with their time. I think the reason for that is that everyone remembers what it's like to be a trainee and what it's like to be junior. And so they're very incentivized to invest that back into new talent coming into the team. So you get the benefit of that really for the whole of your career. My team is fantastic. We're a really close-knit team. I know that I've always got people to turn to for support when I need it. I think it is important to also acknowledge the difficulties and the challenges of a career in law. It is very high pressured and there are times where you have to work extremely hard. What really helps with that is being meticulously organised. It's quite an underrated quality, I would say, but actually that is really important. Being really organised, knowing exactly what it is that you need to get done within a week, and then being able to prioritise is a skill that you'll develop as you go on. And actually that does really help with times when you're balancing a lot of competing deadlines. Also, your stamina does just increase. I remember at the very beginning of my career just thinking I couldn't possibly, work that hard. But actually, once you've taken real ownership of your career and it's something that you're really invested in and it's something that you know that you're good at, it becomes a lot easier and you're so much more invested in the transactions that you manage. So I do always say to people, it seems daunting, but you can absolutely rise to the challenge. And it isn't for everyone, and that's absolutely fine. But I encourage people to try it because whilst that can maybe be the most taxing element of the job, there are also huge benefits and huge rewards of this career. So debt capital markets is a really fascinating area because it's so impacted by what's happening in the geopolitical space. Almost anything that happens politically will have some form of impact on the work that we do. And you do often find that lawyers are quite politically engaged and quite curious about what's happening in the wider world. And I think that's because it really gives you context as to why you are busy in a particular area, why you are working on something. And that's not to say that you have to have a particular interest in just economics or just mergers and acquisitions. Really, any interest in what's happening in the broader world, whether that's the environment, international relations, that will have some form of impacts in the work that you do and in your practice area. And I think that really helps with keeping you engaged and interested in what's going on at work. So in debt capital markets, we're mostly associated with bond issuances as a debt product. And one thing that the whole industry is really grappling at the moment with is the impact of digitalization on bond issuances and more broadly AI. I don't think anyone has really landed on exactly how it's going to shape the market. I think it's all still to play for. And there's a lot of thinking going into how we actually regulate this technology and how we actually use it as a means of increasing efficiency and to make people's lives easier. So I think it is going to take quite a long time for it to settle down, but certainly it's a really interesting development. And I think to some extent, lawyers have the ability to shape the way that it's going to be used in future. So it's quite an exciting time to be working in the industry. I would certainly encourage students. I think the advice that I would give to aspiring lawyers who are thinking about a career in debt capital markets is try not to worry too much about having the right experience on your CV. I think that a lot of people feel that they have to have a big name law firm on their CV, that they have to have a certain amount of contacts in the industry before they can even contemplate applying. And actually, I would say that really any experience is valuable experience. If you can show that you've been proactive and you've worked hard at something, that you've found creative solutions to problems, that you've demonstrated really strong communication skills, all of that is really valuable experience. And actually, if you haven't got specific legal experience or you haven't got contacts in the industry, maybe you can speak about something different and that would actually be of interest to the person interviewing you. So I would say don't discount any experience that you have and don't feel that there's one type of person who is fit for a career in law. I think it's open to everyone. There's no one type of relevant experience when you're thinking about a career in law. All experience can be relevant if you can speak cogently to it in an interview. There is a misconception that you have to have gone to university to be a lawyer, and that's also not true. You can earn as you learn through a solicitor apprenticeship scheme. That's something that our firm offers and quite a few other firms do too. And that gives you opportunity to actually get paid on day one, which is an important consideration for a lot of people. And you get the same experience as a trainee, in fact, more so in terms of the number of rotations available to you. And you can actually really think about whether a career in law is right for you. And at the end of it, you have some really valuable work experience. So even if you go in another direction with your career, I think it's a really good opportunity to look at. I think one thing that I wish I'd known at the beginning of my career from a personal perspective is that it will all click into place. I think there are times when you're sat there absolutely not understanding what's going on around you and just feeling like everyone else completely gets it and is not having any problems understanding. But everyone has been where you have been, and you can only get to that next stage by being exposed to new things that you haven't come across before and by learning as you go. So you shouldn't feel as though you should land on day one as the finished product. No one can do that. And it's completely okay to make mistakes along the way. So that's something that I wish I'd appreciated more. You know, just don't put too much pressure on yourself. You'll absolutely get there, and things do click into place, and it might be on the first explanation or it might be on the fifth, but you'll absolutely get there.